today we're going to start feels like a tough word, but we're going to continue-ish on this idea of the encounters with Jesus. And so this is kind of our next segment we're going to be looking at. And we want to go through the book of John. And we're going to look real specifically at just regular people that are running into Jesus, that are having some sort of an encounter and experience with him. And what we're going to see through that is a wide range of responses that people have to Jesus. And uniquely with that, we're also going to find that some of those responses that other people have are really not any different than responses people have today to encountering Jesus. And so that's really kind of what we're going to be looking at. And so today we're going to be starting with, the skepticism in the form of a student is the idea. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to John, and we're going to be in chapter 1. So John chapter 1, and we're going to be way down at the end of this chapter, starting at verse 43. And so what we're going to be looking at is going to be Nathaniel, as it would be, though really only referred to that here in John. That's kind of a fun fact that I ran into, this Nathaniel. So everywhere else, anybody stab at what he's really called, or other people will call him? Probably Bartholomew, which is kind of a neat fact. So if you look in Matthew or Mark or Luke, it'll refer to Philip and Bartholomew, and here he refers to him as Nathaniel, and maybe that's just John's real great first-person account of saying, oh, well, it was the family name that we said Nathaniel, but we knew him as Bartholomew, or something like that. We don't really know, and it's not a big deal, but just fun fact. So Nathaniel here, maybe has another name that people called him. So we're going to be in John 1, and I'm going to start reading actually in verse 43. It says, "The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, 'Follow me.' Philip, like Andrew and Peter, were from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, 'We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, the one about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph.' 'Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?' Nathanael asked. 'Come and see,' said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, 'Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit.' 'How do you know me?' Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, 'I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you.' Then Nathanael declared, 'Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel.' Jesus said, 'You believe because I saw you under the fig tree, because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that.' He then added, 'Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open, and angels of God descending and ascending on the Son of Man.'" So Nathanael's default response is kind of a little skeptical. Can anything good come from Nazareth? And I think skepticism is really just, it's a position of doubting something on face value. He doesn't believe that anything good can come from Nazareth. And nothing good can come from this place. And now, that's kind of an interesting concept. So it's honestly like a little bit of a snobbish sort of a response as well. So in the Jewish culture, Jerusalem is kind of, it's the pinnacle. It's where everything is happening. And so if you're from Jerusalem, it's kind of a big deal. And you would expect somebody important like the Messiah to come from there. And so people would regularly look, if you're from Jerusalem, you would regularly look down on people from Galilee. That wouldn't be like a good place to come from. It wouldn't be a respectable spot. And ironically, among Galileans, they'll look down on other Galileans in the same time. And so Philip here and Andrew and Peter, they're all from this town of Bethsaida. They would look down on someone from Nazareth. And so it's kind of just that trickle-down effect of, well, there's always somebody worse than me, and nothing good can possibly come from somewhere where, nothing good is known to come from. So he's kind of discredited the idea of the Savior being somebody, the Messiah being something, anything, because of where he came from. And now, it's a tough spot, but it's a realistic spot that I think people get ourselves into by discrediting something just because of what it is, or discrediting something just because of what you think you know about it or what you've heard about it without having to actually see or experience or understand it yourself. So we'll discredit something inherently because of that. That's really not unusual, for people today. People will say, something, Christianity can't possibly be true because, Christians are hypocrites, which, yeah, that's pretty true, I don't live to the level of what I know to be right, and that is a very true statement, and it's fortunately true for all of us. And so, people would discredit Christianity based on people who are Christians and not Christ himself. People will think that, I know so much better, or there's a phrase. People say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. That's kind of a one that pops around. So they want to discredit something based on what they think they know about it, or they've got some elevated higher thinking that has brought them enlightenment that therefore doesn't align with Christianity. There's going to be something that's going to happen with that. And there's a lot of problems, unfortunately, with taking that perspective, and Nathaniel sees it here in the rest of Jesus' explanation, but people are going to see that inherently otherwise, that there's aspects of Christianity that I think everybody can agree on. There are some things written down in our Bible that are really not controversial at all. The fact that you should, lying is bad, and stealing is bad, and being jealous isn't inherently a good thing, and loving your enemies and being kind to people even though they're not kind to you. Those are all really universally acceptable, lines of thought, and it's okay. And those are things that you don't get if you didn't look at the Bible, because nowhere else in nature are you going to see those concepts get played out. Loving your enemies and being nice to people who, are weaker than you, taking care of widows and orphans and those ideas, those only come from the Bible. You're not going to find that anywhere else. Survival of the fittest is exactly the opposite of that. And if human beings are anything more than just what nature is around us, then you can't say we're totally fine and completely different than everything else that exists in all of nature. You're either called out or you're not. And so you can't just hang on to the parts of Christianity that sound nice without having to embrace the hard realities that exist behind it that are foundational to why those exist in the first place. You can't love your enemy without having a definition of what love really is. And you can't define love and what it really is without getting it from here. And so for people who want to push Christianity aside and say, okay, I do think that, stealing and lying are wrong, but I don't want to believe everything else in the Bible. You have to kind of accept that whether you liked it or not, your worldview was shaped by the Bible, even if you don't want to admit that was the case. The Bible was here before you. You didn't make that up, and either did I. What we value as human beings as society is shaped on this, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. You don't get to those conclusions without this. And so being skeptical is fine, and he clearly is, but if you get only to the skepticism part and you dismiss everything beyond that because you don't like how it sounds or you don't like that it's from Nazareth, then you're never going to logically get beyond that fact, unfortunately. But some people are going to be skeptical, and that's just the nature of it. But then he says, can anything good come from Nazareth? I think that is one of the more insightful questions that could be asked, because what it does is it assumes that something can be good. And I think it's a great moment where Nathanael here recognizes that beyond himself, or beyond, the world that he lives in and has to experience, beyond the Roman culture that he is surrounded in, that something can be good. And the Messiah was supposed to be something good. Maybe not to the extent that they could recognize it. They were expecting a great military leader, or, the way I like to think of it is, they were looking for the son of David who killed his tens of thousands while Saul killed his thousands. Like, they were looking for maybe not the Messiah that you expected. But they were waiting for this Messiah to be good. And he was looking for something to be good. And now, calling something good really only works if you have a standard for what good is. And a standard for what good is really works on, what's its purpose. Like, I have a watch, and if I tried to use this watch and tried to nail in a hammer, or put in a nail, it would probably fail pretty miserably, because it's not made to do that. It would just break, and I have no doubt about that. So my watch would be a terrible hammer, but that's not its purpose. It's a good watch when it tells me the time. So something is only good or bad based on what its intention was. And now, lucky for us, John covers a little bit on what is good right in this chapter. So up in verse 1, he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." So he's referencing very clearly back to creation, right? He's saying, in the beginning was the Word, and he was there at the beginning. So when we look at the creation account, there is one very key phrase that gets repeated several times throughout the entirety of it, and it gives us a definition and a standard of people and the world around us. And that's when God spoke those things into existence and analyzed it against its purpose, against its created purpose, and he says, it's good. Or when he gets to the very end, he says, just the greatest phrase, which is, it is very good. There's a standard for what good is. There is a purpose to your life, and there's a purpose that you've been given based on the fact that you're created, and it can be good. If you don't have a standard, or if you don't want to allow the Bible to define your life and the difference between good and bad, then you will never, ever have a reason to say anything is a good watch or a bad watch, or someone is a good person or a bad person. You don't have a standard against that. But Nathanael's looking for someone who's going to be good. And it's a fair thing to look for, and it's a fair thing to acknowledge. And I think it's silly to look at people around and say that's a good person and that's a bad person, and not have some inherent feeling of what makes them good or bad. And that's an okay thing for us to look for. And I think it's an okay thing that Nathanael is looking for here. And the problem is coming from his skepticism is he's going to have to find it at some point. And I think there's a cool analogy of the idea of losing your keys. Because when you lose your keys, I'd like to say I don't do this very often. I do it all the time. But if you lose your keys, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start looking in all the places where you would think it could be. So what do? You retrace your steps, right? You start going back and say, okay, where could my keys be? Did I hang them up? No. Did I drop them in the couch? Probably not. Did I just throw them on the table? Are they down on my desk? Did I leave them in my pocket and I just never looked there? Like, your keys are going to be one of those things where you're going to go back through all the places it could be. But after you go through all the places where your keys could be, you're going to have to start looking at all the places where your keys couldn't be. And sometimes that's going to be the place where you're going to find it. And that's exactly what Nathanael's going to experience here, because they're going to expect a Messiah that's coming from somewhere where he could be from. But he's going to realize that when he's not from there, that what you're looking for came from Nazareth. And so you're going to start finding those things in the places where it couldn't be as well. Oh, yeah. Here's just the most confusing portion of this all. I saw you under the fig tree. What's up with that fig tree? Right? We don't get anything about it. I mean, I saw you under the fig tree, but he says when he went and he found Nathanael, doesn't say anything about where he found Nathanael. But it feels like that should be a pretty impactful key detail, right? So Philip, like Andrew Peters from the town of Bethsaida, Philip found Nathanael and told him, what's up with this fig tree? It just drove me nuts. The point is, we don't know. And it's okay. But what it did mean is that it was really impactful to Nathanael. And it convicted him, and it drew him in, and it made him acknowledge something different. So we don't know everything about this fig tree, and that's totally fine. But what we see happen on the knowledge of this fig tree, whatever it meant to Nathanael, is that we also see what I hope to be the natural progression of our own skepticism come to light. And that's when you find that you've been presented with the right answers, you have to accept that those are the right answers. Skepticism in itself is not wrong. It's okay to ask questions. And we're going to have our own questions that we need to ask. And, I think any Christian who wants to tell you that they've never doubted or wondered or wrestled with these ideas or asked themselves, is this really true? And probably felt guilty later on for having to ask themselves that question. If anybody tells you they haven't, they should review what the Bible has to say about lying. But also, it's okay to ask those questions. And you're going to run into people who are going to be asking those same questions, and it's not wrong to have them. But at the same time, living in skepticism for a long time is not a place to be. So you are going to find answers. In Nathanael's case, they came from Nazareth. And that was just crazy to him, and it's fine. But it's not a place to dwell forever. It's intellectually dishonest. It's going to do nothing but hurt you. It's going to do nothing but bring you to more and more questions. And questions are fine, but when you find answers, it's kind of important to embrace those as well. And we see Nathanael's example of that. So he doubts that anything can come from Nazareth, but he has his aha moment of, oh yeah, the Messiah did come from Nazareth, and this is him. And he convicts himself, and maybe a little quickly in some capacity. I mean, or at least what's recorded here. I guess, that's a hard concept that I run into occasionally, but I think often what we get recorded in a gospel is going to give us exactly what you need, but it probably wasn't the entirety of, maybe every conversation that really existed. But Jesus says something absolutely remarkable here, and it allowed me to do one of my favorite things when we're reading the New Testament, so we're going to do it this morning. So Jesus said, down in verse 50, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that." He then added, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." So this is an Old Testament reference. So they happen a lot. And something that I have found to be an incredible blessing is when I run into those references, those hyperlinks as it would be in my Bible, is to go back and read it, because when you read just that tidbit in its context, it usually paints a bigger picture. And lucky for us, this is one of those moments it does. And so if you already have your Bibles, that's right, we talked about that. Let's go ahead and flip it back to Genesis chapter 28. And so this is the inspiration for a terrible piece of exercise equipment, but it's Jacob's ladder, as it would be. And it's Jacob's dream and what he sees of the promise being made to this nation. So Genesis 28, I'm going to start reading in verse 10. It says, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. What? I don't know if I could sleep with my head on a rock, but somehow Jacob did it. Tough guy. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land and will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. He just said he's going to see angels ascending and descending, and it felt kind of commonplace. But when you look at the entirety of that promise, Jesus is making a pretty incredible claim about himself, that he is the promised one that's going to bring all peoples together. I like that that's plural, peoples. I don't know why it feels funny, but it sounds funny in my head. So just an incredible promise that happens here. And we see the full scope of what it means to be skeptical. And it's fine. So not trusting everything you heard right away is an okay way to live. It's not terrible. I had a preacher years ago. I'll never forget it. I'm going to forget lots of parts of it. I don't remember his name whatsoever. That's real sad. But he said something from the pulpit that struck me enough that now that I have a pulpit to stand behind, I'm going to tell you, don't trust anything I tell you. And that sounds real hard. And it's okay, because I am going to do my very best to present you guys with good, sound, contextually honest, biblical accuracy. I'm going to do my best. But at the same time, I'm still just a person. And I am not Christ. I am not, your Bible. I want you guys to maybe hear what I say and question it and look at it and come to a conclusion on yourself. I'm hopefully going to give you things to think about, hopefully going to give you things to look into, to question, but I'm also not going to be the person who should be the source of any of your answers, because I'm not that guy. There's somebody else very, very good for that. So being skeptical is fine. But looking for the answers that are there, honestly, to your big questions, are coming from Christ. And Nathaniel came to that conclusion on his own. And it might be the last place that he thought to look. It might be a place he'd never thought to look. But those answers came from Nazareth. And it's meant for everybody.